Welcome, everyone. So glad that you could be here tonight. My name is Elise Gonzalez, and I'm the director of Ruby City. Thank you for joining us tonight for our latest installment of tah-yehr Talk, which we are doing in conjunction with the Carver Community Cultural Center. This collaborative program allows us to speak with regional and national contemporary artists, learning about what they are working on and how their practices have developed. So for tonight's talk, just a little bit of housekeeping. Feel free to submit any questions that you might have in the chat function, and we'll get to those later in the hour. But for tonight's guest, I'm pleased to have Jose Villalobos with us this evening. We'll be learning about his current and past projects, but also hearing more about how he works and the passions that drive his projects. Jose was born and raised in El Paso, Texas. His multifaceted practice has developed into one that utilizes the images, tropes, and fashions of the norteño culture to subvert the frequent displays of machismo and homophobia that formed a part of his youth. Since 2016, when he graduated from UT San Antonio, he has been exhibiting and performing frequently at among many institutions such as the Albright College in Reading, Pennsylvania, the Guadalupe Cultural Arts Center here in San Antonio, Mexique Arte Museum in Austin, Texas, the El Paso Museum of Art, and the El Museo de Arte de Ciudad Juarez in Mexico. In 2020, he received the Tane Foundation Award and is a 2018 recipient of the Joan Mitchell Foundation Painters and Sculptors Grant, which granted him not only a significant monetary award, but a residency in New Orleans, something he has yet to take advantage of because of COVID. And I should say you're in luck because you can see his work in person here in San Antonio at Art Pace, where he has his exhibition on view, De Los Otros, through July 18. And he has another solo presentation currently on view at the Dallas Latino Cultural Center through August 28th. Finally, for those of you who are farther afield, you can see his work in the Atlanta Biennial through August 1st. So with that, I want to welcome you, Jose, and thank you for being with us.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you for having me. It's been quite the year, but I am excited to have this conversation and talk a little bit about my practice and what I do as an artist, for sure.
And it has been quite a year. And even the beginning of this year, we'd planned to do this earlier in the year. And quite frankly, we haven't been able to do it because you are so busy and doing so many incredible things. So we feel very lucky and delighted to have you here tonight. So thanks for making the time and for chatting with me this evening.
Thank you. Yeah, COVID kind of was strange for a little bit, things kind of slowed down, but thankfully things are starting to look up. There's still a lot of work to be done as far as where we're heading as a nation, but I think definitely there's been opportunities that have been presented to me, and it's a blessing to be able to have these important opportunities. And also it's important to talk about my work, right? Whether it's by showing it or having these artist talks, for sure.
Right. And it strikes me that as devastating as COVID-19 is, in many ways, it helped add to your platform for discussing a lot of these issues, which your work delves into, which is about inequities, and and so it just seems like this is a moment to really begin to unravel those questions and to begin to think about brighter futures and but of course, in order to do that, one has to contend with the past, which is a lot of what your work is about. Right. And that's in some ways what I want to sort of start with, which is, we've spoken in the past, and I've heard you speak about coming from a very modest background and not going to galleries and museums. And so I'm wondering, how did you decide to become an artist? I mean, that's a very bold decision.
Yeah. It was, it kind of came in as, so even as a kid, I was always creative in the sense that, for me, art was trying to replicate a cartoon or a coloring book figure. If to me that was art. I didn't know what really art really was. I didn't know what painting was. I didn't know a lot of things. And and it's a lot of just because my background, where I come from, you know, my parents were never kind of exposed to such culture, or you know, just also both my parents were working all the time, so there was no, it was all about survival. And so, you know, when I moved from El Paso to San Antonio, and kind of went to college to, you know, I was first concentrating on being an English major because I thought that there was a time in which I kind of just fell in love with poetry, right? Because that was maybe one of the things that I had accessibility to in school, you know, being just going to public school and stuff like that. And so yeah, so I thought that I wanted to become a writer, or, you know, and I also, as a kid, I read Harry Potter, so I was like, oh my God, if creating another world where, you know, it was a possibility, I would do it. And yeah, I think that's kind of where it, you know, where it came in, and I wanted to really just, and I also thought that English was also another way of being able to get a job, right? And for my family, a lot of that was that, right? It's how are you gonna support yourself? How are you gonna? It's always about having something that is a job and stability of some sort. And I took my first art class, and I kind of just went back into it, and I really, that's when I started to understand what contemporary art was, and what art can do, whether it was performance or whether it was sculpture, or you know, even if it was just drawing, whatever it may have been. But seeing in a contemporary aspect, it was completely different.
Mhm.
So it, you know, it kind of just started that way. And
What class did you take and
I
why?
took I took art appreciation is what I took, right? Because it was like, oh, it's a required credit. Like, I'll just take whatever is easiest. And my professor at the time, which her name is Kim Ronfeld, she she was really, really awesome, and she was really hands on with the assignments, right? And it was a lot about it was a lot about like creating still, right? So it wasn't just learning about work. We would do things. We were allowed to be creative, and, you know, whether it was painting or doing a collaborative collage or whatever it may have been. And I you know, I wanted to do more with it, and I wanted to just wanted to express myself that way. And kind of just from there, I made that decision to, I was going to switch to become an artist. And ever since then, I have been fighting hard to
So
stay afloat with all the other artists, right?
yeah, right. But so after one class, you were like, this is it. I'm going to be an
Yeah,
artist. Wow.
yeah,
That was quite a class.
yeah. Yeah.
So, okay, so you're at UTSA, you know you're going to be an artist, and you go into ceramics. And yet, and I should say for our audience, you know, I don't think of you as a ceramicist now.
Right.
You're making these large scale installations,
Yeah.
but I don't think of ceramics as forming a basis of them. And so I'm wondering, like, what prompted ceramics
Yeah. So ceramics, you know, for me, ceramic work is, you know, I took my first ceramics class, and I kind of love the idea of turning a lump of dirt into something, right? And it also, there's the option of knowing ceramic work, right? And what you can do with it, as far as if you're in a pinch, can you produce pottery and sell it, right? Something
right.
that is sustainable, something that you're able to also make an income out of. And yeah, so, you know, I kind of went into ceramics, and I had a love-hate relationship with it. It was this thing that was, the thing that used to make me really upset was when I would make something and I would glaze it thinking that it was going to come out one way, and it would come out like totally opposite. It usually got really dark browns or ugly colors, and they were supposed to be red or pink. And
Mhm.
so it was this unpredictability that I didn't like about it. but also that was also another thing that I did like from it,
Mhm.
right? Because it's kind of, you have control, but then you don't have control.
Right.
And I just kind of went, I wanted to create larger work. I wanted to create installation work when I kind of started doing research, or I would get introduced to an artist, and that's kind of how I kind of just moved forward. Yeah, because once I graduated, I never used ceramics for a very long time, and also the other thing about clay is, you have to have like a kiln accessible to you. There's like certain components that you can't do with clay work that you can with other work. But I
Right.
think that also what it went in for me, it was, when I really started to develop the body of work that I'm doing now, I was actually scared to make that kind of work, right? One, it was that I was not open and I was not out to a lot of people. And so I kind of just said, I'm going to make this work because I feel that it is important to talk about.
Mhm.
And also I was scared because I was showing myself, and I was showing the side of me that nobody knew, right? Specifically, family, or even maybe friend circles, or whatever it may have, may be. But I kind of just completely created a new body of work, not using clay, and that was in 2016 at the Guadalupe Cultural Arts Center. And a lot of it was, why don't I, what I want to talk about is the homophobia and the machismo that is in the culture itself, and how do I dismantle, how do I deconstruct this, and how do I create an important message using my work. And it's also, I could have easily created certain things out of clay. I could have created certain objects, replicate them out of clay, but for me it was more about uh, using the physical object that carries that sense of power, or that sense of just something that has been carried with throughout history, right? The
Mhm.
object itself. So that's kind of how I started getting into other material, but mainly it was because I wanted to create larger scale work, and
Right.
also thinking about the accessibility and what was available to me at that time.
Yeah. And so then, and for our audience, just so everybody knows, Jose's large scale installations are incorporating like the accoutrement of the norteño culture. So like Western wear that has a lot of
Right. And I
flashing,
can and I can
brashness.
share my screen so we can kind of
That would be great.
yeah. Yeah. So when I started talking about, for an example, if I wanted to recreate a cowboy hat out of clay, I could have done it, but then using that physical object itself goes into a further
Hmm.
notion of really deconstructing that object that carries that history and that power throughout the Norteño culture. But yeah, I mean, and the work that I started doing for the Guadalupe was getting these belts and putting these homophobic slurs on them, right? And kind of really just talking about the machismo that exists, and also the sense of power and the sense of what a word
Hmm.
or an object has, like that power that has is very important, right? And but yeah, I mean, for me, it was like getting these belts made, and then having them stamped with such words, and because it's kind of where men carry their legacy of their name, whether it's a last name, right? And kind of replacing it with something that I grew up kind of hearing, whether it was at school, or whether it was from an uncle, or whether it was from a cousin or a brother-in-law, or whatever it may be, right? It was just somewhere around, maybe not directed towards me, but it was something that was around, definitely. And I mean, of course, some of them was directed at me, and but to do this and kind of subvert that idea, right, of this, and kind of also talking about discipline, right? I was often disciplined of like how I run, how I should be walking, how I should my mannerism was very important, and for being a boy and how we were supposed to carry ourselves, and the belt is used as a discipline tool. So yeah, I mean the scale of my work is kind of big, and I can kind of talk about where my some of the earlier works that I discovered of different artists that I kind of fell in love with, that kind of when I saw it, I was like, this is the kind of work I want to do. This is big. This is like makes an impact. So this is Damian Ortega. When I discovered him in school, I fell in love with his work. And it was the scale of it, and it was also this idea of also deconstructing an object, right? And but yeah, so I mean, this is one of artists. Another pair of artists that I really take inspiration from is Los Carpinteros.
Mm-hmm.
And they create these installations that are massive and a lot of like suspended kind of objects, which is kind of what I tend to do as well.
So I should, Jose Damian Ortega's, that piece that you just showed. So that I was working at the ICA in Philadelphia when that was first shown in the States. And
Oh, really?
so it was an incredibly complex work to install, but also,
Yeah.
He's such a thoughtful artist and so smart
Yeah.
that it's great to see that, to really begin to see some of the connections between how you're thinking about space and
Right.
and claiming space, right? And
Right.
for these very powerful ideas about also claiming space for LGBTQ people, folks.
Right.
And it just strikes me that your installations, they are very complex and complicated, and they often involve you. I mean, well, maybe you correct me. Like, it seems to me like they also involve you mastering like new skill sets at all times. Anywhere.
Oh, absolutely. This is the one thing that I love to do about my work, right? So I am not afraid. So this is also not, like, another reason why I kind of switched, kind of opened myself up to other possibilities rather than just ceramics, is because as artists, we also tend to kind of stay in our circle and expand within our circle, right? So, ceramics is like a small, it's like the smaller part of the art world, but it's kind of like you're a ceramicist. People kind of don't get out of that. There's some people who maybe get out of that. Same thing as some painters, the type of work that they do is just contemporary art painting. So for me, I'm never, even as a kid, and this comes from when I was a kid, I always loved to kind of problem solve or make anything out of just whatever I can get my hands on. And whether it was making a doll out of thread or yarn, or for me, I'm not afraid of trying something new, even though I may know that the possibility of mastering it is going to be zero at sometimes. It's because you just don't know. But that's the thing, is you don't know. So you don't know if you're capable of doing it. You have to try, right? You have to try to just, for me, it's playing around. I love to play around with work, right? I feel that when I play around with work, I see the limitations of what I can do and what I can't do, but also have fun with it, right? I feel that as an artist, when it becomes a drag to create work, like something is off, something is wrong, like you should be able, this is what we do, and we do it because we enjoy it and because it's important. So for me, it's a lot of that. I'm not afraid to play around with whatever. I try to get my hands on whatever material and mess around with whatever material. And I have done all kinds of stuff. Played with resin. I'm going to dive into my next journey of working with another material. I'm going to start, playing around with some fiberglass. And but I'm not afraid of trying new things, and it's just I get it that sometimes we have to maybe master a certain thing to have everything happen like cohesively, but also it's not, we shouldn't just be stuck to one thing. And I
Mhm.
just love to play around with material. And then when it comes down to installation, that's another whole process of the work, right? Installing something like this or something like this that is a little bit more complicated. How are we going to hang from the ceiling? What type of ceiling it is? So that in itself is also another puzzle.
Right.
And it's like
It's a really different art form, right?
yeah, and I think that installation also just shifts to its own environment too, because not every room is the same. Not every room will be built the same. So
Right.
wherever you display the work, it can shift, and that shift can be good, or it can be maybe not so good. It just depends. But it's all part of like that problem solving aspect of it.
Well, it seems like, in particular, well, even this installation, it's
Right,
like it's another, like you really thrive on these problems, whatever they are, the constraint,
right,
right, of
right.
figuring them out. So,
Yeah.
so when you're learning a new skill, are you just throwing things out left and right until you feel good about it, or?
Kind of, sort of, yeah. I mean, I do kind of go through my phase of like, oh, is this gonna work? I don't know. And sometimes the idea will be something completely different than what it ends up being. It'll be
Yeah.
something else. But generally, I try, and right now it's a little bit difficult too because I don't have a studio space. So literally, my studio space is my kitchen and my
Right.
living room and whatever space I can put my work into. And doing something like this, for an example, this installation right now is in Dallas, and this is a huge, and I mean, it's a big installation. Standing myself, I'm probably right below that first suitcase.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so like it's very, very tall, and it's massive. It's this whole pack is made out of wood and leather and metal, so it weighs. And then we had to figure out how we're gonna hang this, and then how we're gonna put the suitcases on top without the fishing line ripping or popping or whatever it may be. So we had to figure that part out. But yeah, I mean, for me, it's that taking up the space is important because then the person becomes more involved. I feel like with an installation, right? Like you're kind of seeing like different different aspects and different views of that specific work. But yeah, I mean, it's always something. And for an example, this piece, I didn't know. I had never put it together until it was the first time living in a space was exactly in that show that just opened.
Right.
Yeah, so like I had never installed it anywhere, so I didn't know how it was gonna go. So that was also another thing that I was kind of gambling with, right? Whether it was gonna work or not, and if it didn't work, what was I gonna do, or what can I
Right.
fix, or what other method can it be displayed?
Right.
But I think through my experience of like installing and hanging stuff from the ceiling, I've been able to um I've been able to tell whether it's something's going to work or not.
So tell us what's the name of this work, and tell us a little bit about this piece.
Yeah, this piece itself, so it's part of an exhibition called Por Maricón, the measures and violence of masculinity. And all the work in this exhibition is it's all tied to this it's all tied to the word masculinity itself and what masculinity entails, but also like the violence that exists behind it. So for this specific work, I gathered a bunch of information looking at different articles, and a lot of it was all news articles and some writings on exactly of different instances in which the LGBTQ community was attacked per se in defense of masculinity. So every single work is tied to also the Mirande sex role inventory. So in the 70s, there is a doctor, her name is Sandra Bem, and she developed what is called the Vamp sex role inventory. And that was a psychological test that was given uh, to individuals to figure out the masculinity, their masculinity and their femininity. And I thought it was very interesting because there, and it was made to try to find, to try to understand androgyny is kind of where that kind of started. And for me, it was a little bit, it was very interesting to see that your masculinity and femininity have to be measured, right, to according to your gender. And so it's kind of all tied to that, but in actuality, it's all, so they're all been things. It's all things that on the violent side of masculinity itself and homophobia, and it's there's works that talk about a young gay kid who was stoned to death in Mexico, and they carved into his stomach. There are all instances of violence, and sometimes we don't understand that violence is not always physical, right? It can also be emotional, and it can also be mental, right? For example, this specific work is called "Con todas mis chivas," and that is a quote that is saying, like, with all my things, or all of my belongings. And this specific piece is about it's still an issue, and it's a rising rate of homelessness among LGBTQ youth, right? And being kicked out of home, and all you have is yourself and your stuff, right? And what you represent. So this is exactly that. It's like this absence of a horse with these suitcases, and kind of also taking ownership of being being queer, right? With this flag that is kind of used symbolically. And but yeah, there's different works that it talks about, like, the violence of alcoholism and what that does also, and how that's violent because that they use it as an excuse to be able to beat and do other things, and whether it's rape as well. And so all this work is kind of tied to this violence that exists, that and that we kind of go, like, we never hear about, right? We see, like, headlines come up here and there, but this is something that is happening on the daily basis.
Right. So this kind of leads me to my other question, which is, like, how do you start a new project? It sounds like it's, maybe one project leads to another with, something piques your interest and you start doing research, or.
Yeah, it's I have so many ideas. I think that's my first problem, right? First world problem is having too many ideas. But generally, there's so many things I want to talk about, and there's so many different ways to talk about them, right? And and a lot of how I start is really just how I connect myself to certain things, right? And also looking at my past, and also looking at what is happening in the present and where we're headed in the future is very important. And sometimes I do research, right? I think research has, my work was very, very autobiographical for a while, and there were certain things that I kind of wanted to explore and research a little bit more, because it is something that is of my descent or my background, right? And kind of diving into these certain things that I didn't even know or discovered is kind of what pushed me into different work. And I think my work is definitely it's taking a shift. And I think also we shouldn't be afraid of a shift. A lot of artists are afraid of shifting because that's what makes them successful. But also, for me it's also important to transform yourself as a person and also as an artist, and talk about what certain issues. But it's we can talk about de los otros a little bit, so kind of how I got into that.
Jose, can I ask, do you consider this work a shift then for you? Is that
yes?
Okay, great.
Yeah, this is definitely a shift in my work. And because for me I was talking a lot about my own story, but then I wanted to talk about story of others, right? And putting it in a sense of, like, the image that I have created under my work, right?
Right.
And the shift is, usually my work has been very flamboyant in a sense, very colorful, and it's kind of taken a turn to become a lot more subtle, a lot more serious, with certain the content itself and also the materiality.
Mm-hmm.
And so when this shift happened, it was when I went to El Paso. Being from El Paso, I wanted to talk about a certain history, which is the history of the braceros. And for me, it was one of the main processing centers is actually in El Paso County. And I went to go visit it, and I went to go to see this farm in which these men were processed through. And my biggest question was, how the hell is there not a single story of someone who is queer in a camp full of men? That was my first question. I was like, how come we don't hear anything about that? I mean, there must have been, my mentality was like, there must have been, this is nuts. So I started doing research, and I started doing a lot of reading, and I started doing a lot of visual research as well. So like documentation of the workers. Also,
Mm-hmm.
my grandfather was a bracero, so he was also part of this program. And that connected the work even further, right? And so I started looking through a lot of photographs, and and also kind of trying to associate them to certain things. And when I went to El Paso, seeing this farm and the field, there were certain things that was very intriguing to me, and it was just for example, like just a big room with nothing but beds, and when I started really going into it, I started reading this book by Mireya Loza,
Mm-hmm.
and she talks about sexuality and masculinity within the bracero camps. And in that specific book, she talks about, she has an interview with this gentleman who was a bracero, and he talks about, she asked a question whether there was any gay braceros, and this man scoffs and he laughs, and he kind of goes, as if there weren't any, right? So he kind of talks about the story of this man. His name was Porfirio. So Porfirio, he was known to sleep with other men, and what he would do is he would cut off the power lines or the power source to the barracks, and he would lay with men.
Mm-hmm.
At a certain point in time, they believed that he had just one person, so a lover, and but it was never disclosed, and which is one of the reasons why the electricity was cut off, is to keep that anonymity, because of what can happen,
Yeah.
and the dangers of being gay, and also in a very homophobic space is very important, which is like, how do we navigate through this, right? Is like kind of how I connected to it, right?
Right.
How did I navigate through a space as such as a kid? And so so I did a lot of visual research, and for me is like, I wanted to recreate these beds, right? And it's when you lay with another man, you're laying in a bed, and you're obviously doing it indoors because he would cut off the power lines.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought this specific, so these images are from Leonard Nadell, and he was the main person that documented the braceros. And these bunks were very interesting to me. And this was actually, this set of bunks were in a farm in Texas. So they were all over different farms, but this specific, the style of bed was very interesting because you can see how close they are to one another, and they're just made out of canvas and wood. So for me, I wanted to recreate this, this kind of the sleeping quarters, or their place where they would just be themselves rather than not working.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of how that work started to happen. And so I recreated them at Art Pace. And this also when I thought about the space, so the space faces a window out.
Right.
I also, for me, it was also important to have the work lend itself to the day versus, and also at night, right? So like the versatility of what it looks like during the day and what it will look like at night. And also the day and night was very important to the story.
Mhm.
So I thought about the functionality of also light, right? How does light play a role in this? And how am I gonna bring light into it after dark? So I kind of saw, how things were kind of set up, and I kind of followed that same model uh, that they kind of, how they lived. And so at night, I developed this sense of these lights that kind of go off and on at certain times. And so one bed would turn red, and then inside of it is a heart, and you can't see it during the day because
Right.
it's underneath the canvas.
Uh-huh.
So you can only see it when it turns on, and it says "tu," like you, and then the bed that lights up in white says "yo," as in you and I.
Uh-huh.
But also together the word spells "tuyo," right, which is yours. So it's like this sense of offering yourself to someone, right, as being yours. And so for me it was exactly that. I wanted to activate the space during the day and also during the night. And this is kind of a way I figured out how to do it. And then I started to also look at the importance of the tools that they used, right? And the tools that they used was called el cortito, and it was a short handled hoe that maybe had a handle of about I think 15 inches, anywhere from 12 to 15 inches.
Mhm.
So I recreated these also hose, and I installed them on a wall hanging. And also the sense of the idea of the lights and how they hit the men was also very important, right? The sun is hitting on you, and then they created a shadow, right? Their casted shadow was very important aspect that I kind of brought into the work itself.
Right.
So this is kind of how the installation looks. So when the light hits it from above, it casts these shadows and kind of reveals these words that are cut out of the hose.
Uh-huh.
And also a lot of my work, I try to um, kind of take the masculinity away of something that may look masculine, right? And for me, it was very interesting. They asked me, well, why is the clear resin and flowers inside these handles? And for me, was growing up, I would see like my friends' dads or uncles and their shift stick on their
Yeah.
trucks or their vehicles always had something encased in resin. It was generally something very like aggressive, like a scorpion or something to that nature. And I wanted to do something a lot more flamboyant, a lot more delicate, which is, what I did. So, so it's
So
kind of how that.
did you cast those yourself, the handles?
Yeah. So I casted the handles. Yes.
And
And
what's
then
flowers that are in them?
yeah, they're plastic flowers simply
Okay.
because well, I also played around with different flowers, and I would get a weird result when casting it. Sometimes it would bubble up because the resin that I used, it was a fast curing resin, and it would cure like super quick, so it would heat up really quick and it would let loose a lot of bubbles, and sometimes those bubbles stayed encased. And yeah, so it took a lot of playing around, and the type of material took a lot of playing around as well. So they're plastic or silk flowers, and these and I had to rust them too, so they weren't rusted. Yeah, so the hose, there were regular sized hose. I cut them, and I cut into the metal part, and also I had to rust them to make them look
Well,
old.
and can you tell us about the significance of the title, De los Otros?
Yeah, so de los otros was a term that was given to identify gay people.
Mhm.
So they would call them others, and so it's kind of what the title is. And also what's very interesting too is I knew that I wanted to put text into this work, and I was thinking about how do I do this, and there were certain different ways, and the specific letters at the top are actually made out of soil, and and river water and cotton from El Paso. So the river water comes from the Rio Grande
Uh-huh.
and the soil. And then as a binding agent, I use cotton, and cotton that I picked from the farm where the braceros were processed. And that's kind of what holds all the letters together. Yeah,
Wow.
so there's always like these small details that if I don't talk about it, people probably will never, hear about it. But yeah, like going into like the process of every little single detail is important, as far as like, what it's made out of or where it comes from.
Yeah. Which is, I mean, it was so interesting to hear your response about being a ceramicist and talking
Right.
about like loving the dirt and then thinking about your practice now, which has almost every installation has some form of dirt in it.
Yes.
And
Yes.
what is, tell me about, I mean, I imagine that's a very obvious significance of your connection to this place that you grew up in El Paso, but are there other references that the dirt brings out in your use of it?
For me, with soil, it reminds me a lot of my childhood. Um, my childhood was growing up and playing outside,
Mhm.
playing around with dirt, playing around with mud, but it's also a very strong connection in the sense of I have to constantly remind myself to stay grounded, right? In
What
regards
does that
to,
mean? Oh, sorry, go ahead. You were going to
no,
answer.
it's fine. And it's, I have to remind myself to stay grounded as far as like what is happening around my surroundings, right? And what is happening to me, whether it is a negative experience, whether it is a positive experience. I think it's very important to stay grounded and to know that this is where you stand, right? And it is also kind of like for me, it's this sense of being together with, you know, like with I guess the earth. It sounds weird, but it's like being together with the earth, and it's just this constant reminder of being grounded to something. And yeah, but generally it's a lot of it. It's just also something that I grew up with as a kid. Also growing up like in Juarez with family, and my grandparents had dirt floors or cement floors. That's a lot of I had an aunt who had I have an aunt still. She's still alive, and her house is made out of nothing but pallets and cardboard.
Yeah.
And her floors are just dirt. She has carpet. But she puts it over the dirt, and it's she lives in Anapra, right? It's like a small like subsidy of Juarez, and it's that's where I come from. I come from this type of background. And so yeah, I mean, I've always kind of used it because of that. It's just something that I kind of reminisce about, but it's also very important to remind myself like staying grounded, and also how the earth is fertile, right?
Yeah.
And how it can be fruitful as well.
It also just strikes me, just hearing you speak about it too, is like, it strikes me as being very Christian, very Catholic too. This idea of earth to earth, ashes to ashes, the idea that,
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I definitely can see that connection. And I grew up in a religious background, my family being like an evangelistical Christian household, and certain, things that I grew up, either believing or kind of in this faith in what we are made to believe, or what, you know, there's another nicer way to say that. But yeah, I mean, I do see that connection now that you mention it for sure.
I mean, there's a lot tied up in that. It's so
Yeah, and
symbolic. Earth.
also too, like I think another important aspect of like the dirt is the aspect of, as a kid I saw a lot of death and a lot of burials. That can also be another connection to it that
Yeah.
and I've used some imagery. I've used caskets and stuff in my work.
Yeah. Well, it also, and even this image that you're going to tell us about, like I love learning that you wanted to be an English major at first, because I feel like that was a piece that fit in and helped me understand so much more about your practice. The idea that how important words are to you, language is.
Right. Yeah,
And
definitely.
so and I know you've been talking about writing and really getting more involved in that. So I want to know about this amazing work that we're looking at now. But I also
Yeah.
will kind of want to hope this leads us to a discussion about language and text and what you're doing with text.
Yeah, definitely. I think text is super important, and it's, it's so funny because I hated reading as a kid. I hated it. I hated it so much because I was forced to do it, you know, and I just hated it so much. And as an adult, or even like maybe actually out of high school, I remember I just started reading, and I read a lot. And um, I mean, I remember I finished like an 800-page book in like a day and a half because
What
I
was that
was,
book? I need to
oh
know.
my God. That was actually, it was, well, I read a lot of Anne Rice because it was very like vampire, mushy gushy crap. But Harry Potter was one of them too. Like that was a super thick book. And and for me, every time I read any fictional like story,
Mhm.
it kind of reminded me of the power that words have to create this whole universe in your head, right? And it's just
Yeah.
like, and it takes you somewhere. And so, yeah, I think that's kind of where I was like, okay, it's so weird. Like we sometimes we kind of don't see the impact that text can do. And I started going more into like very short, um, very short, like sayings, right? And dichos. And this is things that I grew up listening to, but we never put it into text and words in front of us. It's something that we listen to all the time.
Yeah.
And so I kind of just I kind of writing, I've been doing a lot of writing, and I just, and it's usually on my phone because I don't have anything, a pen or pencil, I'm like just on my notes, and I just write whatever comes to my head. And it can be a simple thought. It can be just maybe a phrase of some sort, and it kind of grows. And sometimes I'll go back to these notes and add, or I take out, and it
Mhm.
just becomes its own thing. And also looking at posters too. I think posters are very important because posters, even like for propaganda, right? And then different situations that were happening at different times, and using text is very, it's something that we can almost all understand, right? So text also kind of presets a specific work sometimes, whether it's in Spanish or English, right? I mean, you can get a text and you can translate it on your phone or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
But yeah, so this piece, I'm very interested in kinetic work. I love objects that move. And I created this kinetic sculpture that straps onto myself, and I can move these hats. So these hats go like that. So
Mhm.
they're facing you, and I'll pull strings, and they all face down, and they say something in Spanish. And it's kind of this inspiration behind this work was actually the peacock, and how the peacock is very showy, and how it does certain things to attract others but also show itself, right? And that was kind of the inspiration behind this piece. But yeah, I mean, there's usually a lot of text in my work.
Uh-huh.
I have a series of 4 paintings in Dallas right now, and they're like drawings and gouache multimedia pieces. And you can't see it from far away. You have to be close to the painting to see it,
Mhm.
because the text is the same color as the board. So you see it at an angle.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
and it's hidden. It's like it's white on white, but you can see it because there's a difference in the material, and you can barely see it, but you have to be really, really close to it. Yeah, Texas. This is also another.
Before you move on, can you tell us what is said on the hats?
Yeah, it says "Chinga tu machismo, soy joto y qué." So it's like, fuck your machismo, I'm a faggot, and what? Right? It's like taking this ownership of who I am.
Right.
right? And also using these words that have a negative connotation and owning that
Yeah.
too, and turning it into something positive in a sense, right? And using it as a form of power more
Yeah.
than anything. Yeah. Yeah. So this is also another text in one of my pieces. This is a casket. It is a steel gauge casket that is used to actually bury someone. Very interesting story. This piece itself I had delivered. So I ordered it and they shipped it and they delivered it to Pressa House Gallery. And we were there for the delivery. And it wasn't going to fit in the door because it was crated. So we had to uncrate it outside. And people were kind of like, what the hell's going on? Because they would slow down on the street to see like this casket like on the front
Mhm.
as we were like also moving it in. It was very funny. But yeah, this thing is just sitting in one of the other rooms, and it's just taking up space. But this is also like what my work does. It's big, so it takes up space. But yeah, so en paz descanse tu libertad. Also, there's been at least a couple of works where I talk about this idea of bearing your own freedom, and in order to kind of satisfy these expectations that family and society has
Mhm.
of you as a person. But it's also very well connected in this sense of and it's sad, right, to talk about that, and it's almost true. It's you're you won't find true freedom, until like you're no longer here, right?
Right.
And so it's kind of also relates to that, and it relates to also seeing a lot of death in my family, losing my father when I was 10, and having these men kind of act as a father figure. And how do you get all of these ideas and all of these beliefs from different men into to shape this specific person, right? So that's kind of also how I go about my work.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, let's see my next slide. Yeah, so my next slide, I start talking about a little bit about more about performance.
Which is great because
Yes.
I really want to hear about that. And I just want to encourage folks that if you have any questions, feel free to send them in because this has really flown by, but we're
Yeah.
getting near the end of the hour. But yes, I definitely want to hear about performance. I mean, it's something that I feel almost you do with almost every installation is activated in some way through performance.
Right. Yes, definitely. I think it's there is always, almost always, I'm not gonna say always because it is also super exhausting. This is what some people may not understand is the exhaustion that goes into my work is both mental and actually, mental and emotional, and then it's physical. And there is some work that is that generally I am doing very strenuous activities, and so I try to balance out my performance. I try not to overexert myself too, because in the case that I do have to do a specific performance, I have to be ready, and sometimes you can't do it one after another.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, I generally try to have a performance for my work, especially if it's a big work and it's talking about a certain statement. And this specific image is me of testing and kind of training with these tires. So these tires are super heavy. They don't look like it, but they are. So also the terrain
How
doesn't
much do you
help.
think, like, how much do you think those all weigh together?
Oh God, I don't even know.
Like a
It's
hundred
like,
pounds?
no, it's more than that.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
Yeah, yeah. I think
Okay.
maybe like closer to 200 pounds.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and also the terrain doesn't help out because it's the desert. And when I did this performance, I actually did it in the Rio Grande.
Mhm.
So there's a part of the river between El Paso and Silent Park, New Mexico, where the Rio Grande flows, but
Mhm.
it is a dry part of the river. But some people don't know that the bottom of the river is actually sand. So it's like if you were dragging this through the beach rather than like dirt from the desert.
Mhm.
And so and there's pockets of water too. And when I was dragging these tires along the river, sand and water would just kind of go into the tires and make it heavier. So I'm like, it's very, and that was just one of the things where I was like, okay, I hope I get this performance right. Like, right the first time, this is a documented performance because like I'm not sure if I can do this again. Like, and also was very important to do this performance and understand certain logistics before doing it because for me, performance is important in the fact that I want it to be as true and as raw as possible, right? I
Right.
want that experience, um, one for myself and for the audience, right? And how can I don't want to do this where, I'm pretending I'm pulling tires and we cut and to make it look like that's not where my performativity comes into play. Like for me, it's a very special thing and it's for a certain reason. And yeah, I mean, there's different things that I do. One of the other parts of this performance was I had this glass box on my head. And so let me talk about this tires really quick and why I use them. So along the border wall, the
Mhm.
border patrols drag these tires to keep an even plane so that if someone crosses over, they can track their footsteps. Right. And the reason why I use this is because I cross the river twice. I go from one end to the other and then back. Right. And the reason why I go back is to erase my own tracks using their method. Right.
Right.
So yeah, so also through this part of the work too, what I did is I had this box on my head that was strapped to my neck and my body, and I couldn't just easily take it off. So once it was on, it was on, and there was no lid. It was just a small hole that I would pour water into as I crossed the river. So I used a gallon of water, like different gallons of water that were placed at certain spots in the river as I trekked across it, and I would slowly fill it and it was like talking about the weight of the river and how it can be so violent and how it's used as a weapon too, right? And but the way I tied it to this is that a few years back, one of the border patrols, they probably still are doing this, is that Samaritans would leave gallons of water for those crossing over so that they wouldn't get dehydrated or just die of dehydration. And border patrols started pouring the water that was left for them, and
Right.
so that they had nothing. So the symbolism of the gallon of water was very important, and also the water was very important. And yeah, this was kind of scary because there was parts where I would move and the water would swash and it wouldn't let me breathe, and I would forget that it was such a confined space around my head that I can't move my head to breathe more,
Right.
right? So I would have to like recompose myself, and the water would it kind of became violent, right? Like in this glass
Mhm.
box, it would just move and it wouldn't let me breathe, and
Yeah.
I would fill it up slowly, slowly, as I went. And that's also another thing that I had to try to see, like, can I carry this much water around my neck? Uh, if I need to hold my breath, how long can I hold it for? These are like all the logistics that kind of go into something like this. Um,
I mean, okay, but what I find just astonishing is that I get that you want to practice and do these things before to make sure that it's perfect or as close to perfect as possible on the day that the performance happens or is filmed.
mhm.
But then how do you get in the same mindset of of how do you keep the emotional charge without losing it, knowing that you've done all these rehearsals? I mean, do you do something in particular?
Well, I don't do rehearsals. That's the biggest
Okay.
part of it. Yes. So I try not to do a rehearsal unless I really need to.
Hmm.
There's only certain things that I try to that I test out. Simply was like, okay, can I hold my breath? How long can I hold it for? Right. Um, and it was just like scouting for location and kind of just okay, kind of just like this is what I think what I'm gonna do, but I really try not to rehearse anything.
Yeah.
Um, I just try to figure out the logistical part of certain components just to make sure that they're going to work at the time that I need them to. And at times they don't work, like it's just, but sometimes people are not going to be like, calling that out because you're the only person that usually knows what is going on, not everybody else. So like any little mistake is okay. But yeah, I try not to rehearse. I try to keep it as raw. Also, I try to keep it as a personal experience to myself to do this. And I mean, it's, I didn't rehearse this, and I cut into my close to my eye and my nose bridge. There's a part of the performance where I grab a stone from the ground and I smash the box to release the water. And when I hit myself the second time, the piece of acrylic glass, and it was a thick acrylic glass, it just sliced through my nose bridge, and that I didn't think about at this time, right? Or even doing it, I was like, I could have gone blind. I could have hit my eye. And luckily, nothing happened. I was safe. I just have a scar. But, there's certain things that also I should be a lot more responsible of, like, what if, but also I feel that when I do the what ifs a little too much, I scare myself and I don't do it. Right. And of course, if it's something like extremely, really dangerous, I'm sure that's something that the whole process of the logistical part of it is a lot heavier, like making sure everything works if it's life threatening.
Yeah. So speaking of challenges, this strikes me as a good time to ask the question one of the questions that we got in, which is, what is the hardest material or format that you've worked with or worked in?
I think the hardest, I mean, there's some material that I've worked with where I'm like, oh, it's just difficult to work with. Like resin is just super stupid to work with at times, but I think in general, what is the toughest thing for me, and this is because I have a certain vision of it, is when something has to be documented via video, right? It's like, this is what I want my vision to be, but it's also like, do I have the capabilities to have this many cameras? Or so I mean, editing is that's the one thing that has been very difficult for me, is trying to figure out sound. How do I edit this part of a clip to sound this way? Or I think that has been kind of I wouldn't say like most difficult, it's just more tedious.
Right.
And there is some parts where you're like, oh, crap, like I can't make this, do this, but it's all been a journey to understand the process of a lot of things. But I think the most difficult definitely has to have been like recording something in the video, or like having that vision.
Yeah.
Because it's generally like, I have the vision, I want to look a certain way, and this is the angles that I want. And if you don't have somebody to be able to understand that, then it makes it difficult to create a video piece.
Right. Got it. Oh, wait. Oh, you're dragging boots.
Yeah. So this is also one of the performances I did for Luminaria, and all these boots have cement in them. And yeah, I was easily dragging like probably close to 300 pounds across the park here in San Antonio. And as I would drag them, this is called La Carga de la Tradición. This is like the weight of tradition. And I would pull these, and then I would stop when I would get tired, and I would release one boot. I would cut one boot off, and I would keep dragging the rest. So until like I just had one boot on me. Yeah.
And what was that in response to, or this?
No, just itself, like this idea of like how tradition is so heavy and how we have to carry this weight, right? And it's also this idea of cutting yourself loose, but that it's always going to be around you no matter what. Yeah. This is just like samples of performances, shots that I did. This performance I did at Pressa House, and also performed it in New York City. And this performance is about the rising suicide rates of the LGBT youth, specifically within BIPOC communities. And I performed this in Dallas not like 2 weeks ago, and I tie this noose around my neck, and if the space lends itself for it, I will have a pulley, and I pull this cinder block using my neck, and it does tighten my neck. And in Dallas, I actually bruised myself because I tripped over the rope while running, because it was outside. So what I did is I would spell out these words on the floor with dirt, and I would run, and I would drag the cinder block behind me using my neck. And one of the times that I was doing that, the rope got in my way, and I kind of fell. And when I did that, the noose got really tight, and I didn't stop. I just kept going. And there was a point in time where I was like, okay, I can feel that I'm like probably gonna pass out. And it's kind of like when I continued the other part of the performance. And I want to say that I probably did bruise my esophagus, because it was the next day for a few days after that, I couldn't swallow as easy. Like it would hurt a little bit. But yeah, and I performed this multiple times. Right. So I kind of know like what to expect.
Wow. Oh my gosh. The trials and tribulations you put yourself through.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it's a lot of physicality that exists with the work. Yeah, like this, I was pulled in by a horse into the corral. This is site specific. This is at Rigo Luna's parents' ranch. So, there was a bunch of curators and different people who were invited to this performance. But yeah, I mean, there was it's very physical.
Yeah. And I know that we're getting, we're actually past our hour. So I did want to begin to wrap up a little bit by asking you one more question. I mean, feel free to tell us about this image since it's here.
Oh, yeah, just showing kind of like the physicality that the work goes through, right? So I got these kind of as a video documentation performance, and I had the stitch of the boots tattooed onto my feet. And the feet is something that we're always protecting, and it's one of the sensitive parts of our bodies, which is why we protect them. And it's also just tied to the boot and the design of it. Yeah, it's called Cultural Reminders.
And this is a particular stitch, if I remember correctly.
Right. Yes. This is a toe medallion stitch. There's several names for them, and there's like 3 different types.
Okay. Okay. Also, that looks very painful as a person who's never had a tattoo. That scares me. But we've talked so much about all of these incredible projects that you've done. I mean, you're very prolific. And I'm wondering, is there a dream project that you have in the future that you think about doing? I mean, I know it's clearly you have a notebook of 100 ideas that.
Yeah. I mean, I would really love to, have the opportunity to create one, really, really large scale installation. And I'm talking about, very big. And, but I think also one of actually a dream for me would be to create an illustrated children's book.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So that's actually one of my dreams, is to have a illustrated children's book.
What do you know what the story would be about already?
Kind of, sort of, yeah. It would be about a little boy with his pink boots, and how trying to kind of dismantle this idea of how color is associated with gender, and how we can break that up, and how also children have no notion of such thing until it is instilled in their minds, because this is something that has been carried on through tradition, right, and culture. And but that is definitely one of my dreams, is to have an illustrated children's book that were to be published. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Pink boots. # pink boots. This is great. I was not expecting that. That is fantastic. Thank you for sharing that with us.
Yeah, no problem.
And thank you for being here. And I want to thank all of you for tuning in and watching, and especially the Carver Community Cultural Center for being such great partners with us in the tah-yehr Talk series. I also, of course, want to thank the staff at Ruby City who make all these programs possible. I thank them for their passion and stewardship throughout all of these programs. And finally, Jose, I want to thank you for being here and for sharing so much and for just being such a great artist that's willing to chat with me and chat with our audiences about all that you do. And congratulations to you and all of your accomplishments.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Well, I look forward to learning more about what you're doing. So keep in touch, and
Definitely.
thank you again for being here.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you.